the St. Louis alt.net user group, but I program in JavaScript, so. I used to be an alt.net guy. I got converted. So tonight I'm going to be talking about an open source JavaScript library called Postal.js. It's an in-memory JavaScript service bus, so I'm going to talk about what that means and how I've used it. The format of the talk is going to be, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to jump right into a demo to show some basic usage of Postal.js. Then I'm going to talk about the API for Postal a little bit, some of its advanced features, and then I'm going to round out with a demo in Node and show how I've used Postal.js there, and then some additional resources at the end. So let's talk a little bit about events and messages. I started looking at Postal.js when I was trying to come up with a good way to structure some of my code in the browser. Most of the coding I've been doing is client-side JavaScript. The two approaches that I had taken were basically using the DOM as a message bus, which it's kind of conducive to, right? The DOM has events, right? You can use jQuery. You can create custom events in the DOM. You can throw things on there. You can communicate with it. The DOM can be used as a message bus if you really want to do that. The other way I was attempting to do things was to segregate my code into JavaScript modules, just using function closures, and then exposing some kind of eventing API. So like, you know, on next or on click or whatever, and you pass in a callback to this, and it notifies your other modules of what's going on. And this is kind of this is a fairly typical pattern. You see this, you know, we're mimicking now the Java world or the C# world where you have events and handlers and so on. So a couple of challenges that I came up with in those two scenarios. The first one, the DOM is kind of interesting in that when you create an event handler in the DOM and you fire an event, you can say whether you want the event handler to execute on capturing, which means the event starts at the top of the DOM and tunnels downwards to the target element that fired the event. Not all browsers support this, but you can wire this up in most browsers. Or you can wire up your event handler to fire on bubbling, which means that the event starts at the target element and it travels up the DOM to the very top. The thing that you can't do, though, is you can't instruct anything below the element that triggers the event, that the event actually happened. So the DOM makes a weak message bus because you're really constrained to things that are listening above your element. That's the only place you can actually put event handlers that are of any value. And so what you start to see is a lot of client-side code attaching a whole lot of event handlers onto document because it's at the very top of the DOM. It hears everything. So you can do this. It gets kind of noisy and it's kind of kludgy, and you know, it's not exactly the easiest way to do things. All your client-side code has to know about the DOM in order to take advantage of this. Whether or not it actually uses the DOM for anything else other than event handling, it has to know about it. So that's kind of a limitation. You know, if you take kind of the standard module approach and you're just exposing callback methods on your modules in your client code, then your modules have to know about all the other modules in which they have a vested interest. You know, I want to know about events from this one or events from that one. So all of a sudden I have a tree of dependencies that exist in my client code, and that can become cumbersome when you've got a lot of modules that you're kind of juggling around. So I needed a solution to this problem, and I started looking, and I came across this open source project, Postal.js, and I started playing with it, and I really liked the power that it gave me. The real benefit is that instead of having your client code or even your Node code, but I was on the client, so this was very fresh to me. Instead of having your client code depend on the DOM or depend on a whole bunch of other modules, each one of your client modules simply depends on Postal to be notified of events and to notify everything else of events. So Postal becomes the one dependency that each one of your modules relies on. And your modules don't need to know about anything else if they don't want to. So Postal kind of acts as this central focal point for all eventing that's going to happen in your application. So I want to show you real quick a little example website that I created, a little example web application. So this is called Learn You, Knowledge Through Neighbors, because all web applications need a tagline. The idea here is that there are some things that you might know that you might be really, really good at. Maybe it's not your day job, maybe it's just a hobby or something. But the one thing you would really like to do is have other people pay you to share that knowledge. And so this becomes kind of like a Craigslist, but for knowledge that you have in your head. You know, I'm a bricklayer, I know how to plant a garden, I know how to run correctly, so if you're interested in fitness, I might be able to teach you. So this is kind of a website designed to facilitate that exchange. I'm willing to pay you to teach me something, you're willing to teach me something, so how do we come together and create transactions that are tax-free because it's cash only? So that was the idea here. So whenever I design a web application, when I structure my client code, I carve it up into modules according to functional areas of the application. So here at the very top, you see a bunch of words that represent topics on which people are interested in teaching. So this is kind of my tag cloud, right? Topics that are available. Down here are specific offers that are being made by people for a given topic. And then down here I have, you know, the ubiquitous search function, you know, so we can search for topics that we might specifically be interested in. So if you look at the tag cloud, you can see at the top that art is red, which means art has been selected. It's by default the first thing that happens in the application. And so the offers that you see in the middle are the offers that are applicable or that fall under art. So Felicia, for example, can introduce you to interpretive dance, and David can teach you to paint. If I click on any other one of these topics, we're going to see the offers change in accordance with whatever offers that I have available by different people. And so, you know, it acts pretty much as you'd expect. Or if we come down here in the search box and I type in, let's just say music, all of a sudden I see, well, the topics, I have multiple topics highlighted now, entertainment and music, and now I have several different offers that are subsumed under those categories. So it's kind of a simple interface, right? There's not a whole lot going on, but it's a really easy app to use. And let's say I'm interested, Mark's going to teach me about live music and nightlife. So I click on this link, and all of a sudden I get the details about what Mark's going to teach me and the cost, what he wants to charge for what I'm doing. So I have a lot of interaction here. It's a one-page app. So how do I structure my client code then? Okay, cool. So this is the web page, the HTML markup, and you can see it's pretty simple. I have a div for the tag cloud, a div for the offers, and a div for search. There's not much to the actual markup. Corresponding to these three areas, I have JavaScript modules. Here's my tag cloud module. Here's my offers module, and here is my search module. And in this example, I'm using required.js to set up my modules. I'm not really going to go into that, but basically here I'm defining the code that's going to execute in this module, and I'm defining the dependencies for it. So, for example, in this module, I have a dependency on jQuery, on the postal message bus, and a module I call data, which is simply a bunch of hard-coded data, you know, that I'm going to display up there. So it acts as kind of a fake API for a data store. But the important thing is that when we look at how a module is set up, let's look at the tag cloud. You can see that I'm doing a couple of interesting things. The first thing I'm doing is setting up the code that's actually going to control the UI in the tag cloud, and I assign that to this tag cloud variable. And then the next thing I do is I set up some subscriptions to things that I am interested in the message bus. The first thing I'm interested in is when the message bus tells me that the application is ready. The second thing I'm interested in is when the message bus is going to tell me that the categories have changed in when the categories have changed because of, you know, something, maybe the user typed in a search, or maybe you know, something else happened. So I'm interested in that event. And then the next thing I'm interested in is whether categories have changed because a search was executed and particular categories need to be highlighted. So I'm actually grabbing channels from my service bus, and I'll explain what channels are in a little bit, and then I'm adding subscriptions to them. And then in my subscriptions, I have a function that is basically just a callback that gets invoked whenever one of these messages comes across the message bus. And I do something to my tag cloud object up here. So the public API for the tag cloud object is fill and highlight. So fill is, I want to populate the tag cloud with specific words, and highlight is a function that's going to go through and change the color of those words based on some kind of criteria. So then down here, when the categories change, event fires, I'm going to highlight certain categories, and when the search event fires, I'm going to highlight categories as well. So there's multiple things going on here, but the important thing is that this module depends only on the message bus to tell it when events happen in the application. If we go over to offers, we kind of see the same type of deal. The offers are interested in when categories change, because when different categories have been selected, I need to clear out the HTML that's in the offers, clear out all the pictures and the HTML that's there, and then I need to load new offers based on the categories that have been selected. And the same thing happens when a search occurs. I'm going to have specific offers that match the search criteria, and so I want to clear the old ones and then render the new ones as well. And again, so none of these modules that I have here client side know about each other, right? They all rely on Postal for the eventing that happens in the application. And so this is really important when you have a web page where one event is going to cause a lot of ramifications on the page, right? So instead of wiring up a bunch of jQuery spaghetti code where you're saying, this div has to act this way, or this, this checkbox has to act this way when this button is clicked, you simply encapsulate it all in modules. Use the message bus as your dependency. You subscribe to the same messages on the message bus, and when one of them fires, everything else is notified, and your UI reacts accordingly. So this is kind of an elegant approach to solving this problem. So I'm not going to go into any more of this code, right? I just wanted to kind of give you an example of what I'm doing this. Does anyone have any questions about this before I go on? Yeah?
So the ready event, is that, that's passing through the bus, but is that ultimately being triggered by jQuery? So jQuery is delegating to the bus?
Yeah, very good observation. So this is a file that gets, when required.js is finished loading all of the modules, this handler right here gets called, and I have the standard jQuery ready code inside of this function. And when that is run, when the document has been fully populated, the DOM is fully ready, then I actually tell the bus to publish its own ready event. So I'm not coupling anything to jQuery's ready event. I'm just relying on the bus to tell me when everything is said and done. And the reason I do it that way, so these modules all have jQuery references because they're all doing stuff in the DOM. But the reason I do it this way is because if I had modules that were not UI, they had no interest in the UI, they had no reference to jQuery or whatever, they're not going to be listening to the DOM for that event, they're not going to be listening to jQuery to tell them otherwise. So it's better to have your dependency on the bus and everything listens to the bus, and then it tells the application, okay, we're ready now, go ahead and do your own thing.
It's like a single referee for the whole app as opposed to multiple.
Exactly. And you could use jQuery for that, but then your non-UI code has to be aware of jQuery. Maybe that's not a big deal. I don't know. I don't like that idea, so that's not the way I did it. I'm going to skip some of this because I just basically told you everything here.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So, you could do this like with clean, if you didn't use Postal, you could do it with clean object-oriented JavaScript code.
Yes.
Like you said, I guess that's the second approach you said?
Yes.
Is it really that much better to use this? With this you have the overhead of like loading up another module, and loading up another file, and...
Well, this is nice to loosely coupled, whereas the other way would be tightly coupled. I think the reason why you wanted to do it this way is you wanted to do loosely coupled.
Right. So you're only incurring the penalty of one additional module, and the Postal code is relatively lean. So it's not that one extra get's not going to hurt you. And yes, decoupling was the goal. If I have, I tend to write I try to write my JavaScript code in very terse modules. So I would probably have 10 or 15 for a fairly simple site. This I kind of threw everything into 5 just to make it easy. But maybe I have 10 or 15. And at that point, if I have dependencies on 5 different modules, I have 5 different includes that I've got to have, and 5 different objects that I have to be aware of, 5 different public APIs that I got to worry about changing, and so just using the message bus makes that a little bit easier. There is one significant downside though to using the message bus, and that is, you saw when I was grabbing channels in the message bus, I have to specify a name. So the name of the channel then becomes a maintenance problem, because if you ever decide to change the name of the channel, you have to change it everywhere. unless you use some kind of constants file or something like that, where you're not actually putting, using the string in your modules. The second maintenance problem is that you have no idea what the API is of the object that your handler is going to get when it's executed, when an event occurs. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But basically, your handler is going to get some object that represents data on the bus. And because you don't know what the type is, it may or may not have the properties or methods that you would expect to be there. So that can be a little bit of an issue. Yeah.
I guess I have a little bit of question. So that you have to make sure. How do you know which channels are available? Like which channels you can subscribe to before you publish stuff for?
Well, there's
they're like topics. It seems like you.
Yes. Yeah. So there's no way.
How do you know what topics are available?
So to my knowledge, there's no way to actually query Postal and ask it for its topics. It's a simple in-memory message bus, so you have to be aware of what those topics are, or publish it in some kind of documentation, or have some kind of wrapper that gives that to you. Gives those channels to you if I call like on whatever, and it really is just going to return a channel to me or something like that.
It also gives you the freedom to bind before any events have been published.
Say again?
So I can bind to a bus before anything happens there. There's nothing required to define that bus ahead of time.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's not, as soon as you subscribe, that channel is and that topic is being monitored. And there are different things, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But yes, as soon as you subscribe, like there's nothing that prevents you from subscribing to any message you want to. Yes. Oh, sorry.
There was two, I think, so somebody else was question.
I was just going to ask, is there a naming convention that you use for the channels that help you find out where it's being binded?
There is a naming convention, but it doesn't help you with channel discovery.
Okay.
But I'll get to that in a minute too. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the nature of the events. Are they deferred across the event loop, or do they happen immediately? I mean, in Node.js is event emitter. When you emit an event, it happens right then. It's synchronous. Whereas in like a promises library like Q, things that you might say roughly correspond to an event, they're always deferred across the event loop, so you always know you're lifting out the top of the stack. And I was curious.
I believe Postal is asynchronous. And I think so I was talking to Jim Cohort, who's the guy who maintains it, and I think he's working on introducing something in the API to kind of force it to be synchronous if you want it to be. So, but I'm pretty sure it's asynchronous out of the box. Okay, so it's in memory. It's a service bus. If you want to, the way this is distributed, if you want to include it in your web page and have a global Postal object, you don't want to mess with the nasty module stuff because it's a pain. You don't like require whatever. You can do this. There's a script that comes with it. You just throw it in your web page and boom, window.postal. That's your service bus. It also comes in an AMD compatible module, so you can do like I did, where you set up require and you include it as a module dependency. And there is also a Node.js module that assigns it to exports, and then you can include it as a dependency in your Node modules. So 3 different flavors, pick your poison, whatever floats your boat. Alright, so naming conventions. So in the code I was showing you before, when I would actually get a reference to a channel, what I was actually providing, the string I was actually providing to Postal was called a topic. And a topic is simply an arbitrary message name formatted in dot notation, so like foo.bar.baz. It can contain wildcards, and I'll talk about that in a second. But that's called a topic. So Postal has this concept, it divides topics into kind of namespaces where you have channels, and under a channel you can have any given number of topics. And this kind of makes sense because if you think about it, you may have an application that where you're dealing with automobiles maybe, right? Automobiles and money. For some reason your application deals with both of these things. And so there's a significant difference between grabbing a reference to the automobile channel and calling the reverse topic versus grabbing a reference to the financial channel and calling a reverse topic on that. In one case, you're going to get a car backing up. In the other case, you're going to get someone calling you with a nasty, charge on their credit card or something. So it's a nice way to namespace channels and topics and let you construct your application so that you're not going to stomp on anyone. So you can give channels their own names, and a channel is simply a logical collection of topics, right? It's just a namespace basically. And then when you get a reference to a channel, you tell it which topic you want to subscribe to or which topic you want to publish it to. And the topic is really the name of the message. Yeah.
But that doesn't coincide with the module name or anything like that? It's just
No, it's completely arbitrary. Like whatever you want it to be, that's what it is. So here's this is the example I just talked about, your vehicle channel and your payment channel. So when I grab a reference to the channel here off of the postal object, the first thing I specify is the channel name, the second thing I specify is the topic name. In the example I showed you, I only specify one of those, and it's the topic name. So by default, if you don't give it 2 strings, you're participating in the global channel. And that's really easy. Like if you have a fairly trivial web application and you don't really care about differentiating your channels, you can just put in topic names and participate in the global channel, and no one knows the difference. So, but if you want to divide it up, specifying a channel name and a topic name is the way to do it. So topic names can have wildcards. And a wildcard, there's 2 different kinds of wildcards. The first is the hash wildcard, and this basically lets you take a segment of the topic name and mask it so that when you subscribe to any event that fires under that topic name, it's going to trigger for the masked for the wildcard. So in this case, I have some fulfillment channel, and I have some orders that I'm going to be shipping, and so I have a topic named order.ship.hash. So any topic that's published on the message bus, whether it's like order.ship.finalized or order.ship.placed or whatever, my callback here is going to execute for it because I've wildcarded that one segment of the topic. The asterisk wildcard is for any consecutive character string in the topic. So this is more what how we understand wildcards to be in like file names and stuff like that. So in this case, I have a topic that's order star, and I'm going to get anything that begins with order. Regardless of how many segments it has or whatever, anything that begins with order, my callback is going to get. Now, Jim was saying that this is actually backwards from the way other message buses do wildcards. So like RabbitMQ actually has these same 2 wildcards, but they do the opposite things. So he says in future versions of Postal, they will probably reverse this to meet that convention a little bit better. So when you get a channel and you subscribe to some events, there are some things that you can do to basically manipulate how your event handler is going to work with things that are published on the message bus. And this is kind of where the real power of Postal comes in. If you think about like jQuery events or a Node event emitter, things like that, you're kind of really limited. Like if you assign a callback, that callback's going to fire when the event comes through, and that's just the way it is. With event emitter, you have a method called once, where you can say I only want this callback to fire once, but that's kind of it. Other than that, your callbacks are going to fire when an event occurs, and it's a very simplistic model, very simple way to do things. Postal gives you a lot more control over that. Some really cool stuff. So once you grab a reference to a channel, once you set up a subscription, you can then call a number of methods on it to change the behavior of your callback. So the first one I'm going to talk about is distinct until changed. This method basically prevents callbacks from handling duplicate consecutive topics. So for example, let's say I have a shopping cart set up here, and the channel that I'm going to subscribe to is basically, I'm going to use a wildcard, and I want to know when any item in my store has been selected. And so down at the bottom, I'm going to publish some events. The first one is shirt.selected, and my shirt ID is 102 and the price is 10. The second one is shirt.selected, 102 and price is 10. So these 2 are duplicates, right? So the user clicked twice, as users are prone to do. It wasn't fast enough, so they clicked again. And then I have slacks.selected and shoes.selected. But if we were to look at the total price that we're adding up here in our callback, what we end up with is the price of each one of these individually, and the duplicate shirt is ignored. Now the important thing to note here is that this is consecutive. It only ignores consecutive duplicate events. So if I were to move this publish down here and slacks was in between, it wouldn't ignore that as a duplicate. So it's distinct until changed. Until the topic has changed, ignore any distincts that follow it. It's not really a great method name, but I didn't think it, so. Distinct is what you're really thinking of, right? Subscription callbacks ignore all duplicate topics. So in this case, this is our imaginary World of Warcraft type game where I'm acquiring loot. I'm running around the world, and there's some awesome stuff down in, I'm going to pick up all this crap. And the important thing is, though, that I only need one of each of these, so there's no point in me picking up more crap. So when I fire these events down on the Postal channel, you know, loot acquired, I get a sword, I get a shield, I get another sword, a shield, and boots. You know, basically it's going to take a look at the data, and it's going to take a look at the message that was published, and those two combined, it's going to ignore all the duplicates. And I forgot to mention this before, so the data plays into the duplicates as well. So in the previous example, distinct until changed, you notice the ID of the shirt and the price was exactly the same for those two duplicate messages, so the data has to also be the same. So it will ignore the duplicates here, and it will only let me get one of each of those items. So dispose after is another method you can use. And in this method, you basically say that you want to automatically unsubscribe a channel after a given number of handler invocations. So for example, let's say I have a website, we're going to track your favorite movies. So I set up a channel. The topic I'm subscribing to is favorite.movies. And I only want your top 3. I don't really care any more than that. So we publish three movies, Hot Fuzz, Blade Runner, and Tron. Once we post a 4th time, the event handler will no longer be invoked because I've said disposed after 3, and the favorites array will only contain the first 3 movies that were published on the bus. So this is useful when you want to limit the number of times a handler is invoked. Kind of like once for event emitter, but you specify an actual number. With constraint, and it's plural, with constraints, allows you to specify 1 or more Boolean conditions that have to be satisfied in order for the event handler to fire. So in this case, I have a channel topic called vehicle.accelerated, and I'm going to set up a subscription. And what's going to happen is that in my callback, I'm going to time travel with a specific passenger. But I'm going to set up a constraint. The constraint is that the speed has to be 88 and the passenger has to be Marty. So this handler will only be executed if that constraint is met. So you can see I'm doing 2 things, and two Boolean conditions here. This one is a variable that exists outside of the handler, but I can also evaluate the data that was passed into the handler as well. So you get to examine the message before you actually let the handler fire. Yes?
Can you stack any of these constraints, so like the with distinct and the with constraint?
Yes, you can stack all of them. Okay, as many times as you want.
When you do that, do you get the priors from the with distinct, or does it?
The priors from the with distinct.
The distinct filter is keeping track of what it's already seen.
Right.
So that is some type of map, cache, whatever, right?
Right.
So is that also accessible when you do the with constraint as an additional argument, or is it only the default data for that instance that it's looking at and making that check?
I think it's only the default data. If I understand correctly, you're saying, so if I do distinct first and then with constraint, I believe that it pipes it through so that with constraint we'll only see the ones that pass distinct.
Okay.
I believe that's how it works.
Okay.
Or if you were to switch it, the exact same thing would happen.
Okay.
Oh, another thing to note is that if you change the data in that object in the handler, it's changed for all subsequent handlers. So it doesn't copy that object. It's, you know, if I were to change the passenger name here to Doc Brown, every other handler is going to see Doc Brown. Okay, so that, you know, there are pros and cons to that, right? You may want to do that. That might be, you know, something that you want your event handlers to do. But at the same time, you can never guarantee that all your event handlers are going to see the same data. So, you know, just choose wisely. You probably shouldn't do that, especially if you're wanting other people to write modules and then they're going to use your message bus. Yes?
With you're putting like the decision-making logic in there with the conditionals, so is this basically like the controller of an MVC structure, but like just got by itself? Sorry if that's too weird a question.
You know, MVC means a lot of things, so why not? I'm good with that.
That's the right answer.
I'm good with that. I don't really know. So, and what I'm showing you here is, this is example code, right? So it's like if you write your code like this, you're probably doing it wrong. You know, so just use it in accordance with best practices. You know, don't. I don't know that this would be. I don't know that this would be applicable in MVC, but you know, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the subscribers are actually the viewers. And I think the publishers are actually the...
So if you're publishing the changes in your model, and the subscribers would be updated accordingly. Is that kind of what the idea is?
Well,
yeah, I can see that.
The subscriber is really the
Yeah, I could go with that. I could buy that. So with context is another method, another API method you can use, and this basically coerces the value of this within your callback. So we all love this in JavaScript. So in this case, I have a channel or a topic called coffee.ready, and if I add a normal subscription to my handler, the value of this within that subscription, within that function, as is the value of this within any freestanding function in JavaScript, is the global object. So in the client, this would be window. But if I use the with context API method, I'm going to tell it use this jQuery object so that when my coffee is ready, I can manipulate that. Maybe I throw up a big red light, the coffee's ready or whatever. So I can just say this dot add class or whatever. Yeah.
Does that chain? I mean, in other words, if you set the with context, will that propagate through all the? If you chain after that with these other modifiers, they
yes.
keep that as well.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
What if it's up? Someone else subscribes, like someone else does the postal channel coffee.ready and then subscribes to that.
They're going to get an interesting with object or this object.
But what if you have two different modules that has a different with context on a subscription?
Whichever one is being handled at the time, well, yeah, whichever one is being handled, right, whichever handler is being invoked, that's the one that this object is going to be set.
So you can't have different context based on.
Oh yeah. It's whichever handler is invoked that gets that context, and subsequent handlers that are chained to it. Right.
Change to that subscription, not change to that.
Yes, change to that subscription, right. So if I said like with constraints, with context, or with context, with constraints, that handler would have that same this object. So it's nice because the constraints are designed to be chained onto your handler, and you can modify things in a chainable way, which is, which can be really handy. So with debounce, delays the execution of the callback for a given number of milliseconds after the last time the callback would have been invoked. So this is kind of a weird one. But the easiest way for me to describe this is, if you've ever worked with the resize event on the window object in the browser, it's a massive pain in the ass. Because the resize event fires at a different speed depending on how fast you're moving your mouse, how far you're moving the window, and it can seriously fire like hundreds of times a second, right? Usually you're not really interested in all of those events, you're only interested in the last one, because the last one is going to tell you what the current size of the window is, right? And the last one is usually sometime after the window stops moving. That's how you determine what the last one was. So by using with debounce, I can say 1,000 milliseconds after the last time this event handler fires, or the last time this topic comes across the message bus, then I want to execute my handler. 1,000 seconds after the last time this topic comes across. That's when my handler is going to be executed. So in this case, I subscribe to the resize function in jQuery. Each time it fires, I put a resize event on the postal bus, but this handler will only fire once, after 1 second after the last resize event happens. So I can drag that window all I want, and Postal will ignore it. Once I stop dragging, it'll wait a second, and then that handler will fire. So with delays, exactly what it sounds like. This simply delays a subscription callback for a given number of milliseconds. In this case, I have an alarm clock, and I'm going to hit the snooze button, and I'm going to give it some duration. In this case, it's 30 minutes. So I pass 30 minutes into my with delay. This handler will execute at that point in time. This happens for every topic that comes across this handler. So if you publish 5 messages to the bus, and this handler, and this subscription picks those up, then you'll have 5 handlers that will execute at that given amount of time in the future. So with priority, so you can give your handlers, oh yeah.
Is it possible to update that millisecond before it's done? So like, let's say that I'm using this for like session management. If you're idle for 10 minutes, log me out. So like 5 minutes and I do something, but now it's 10 minutes from now. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Can I update that millisecond time before it runs out?
You could, I think you'd have to unsubscribe and resubscribe to that. I think once you've set it, it's set for that specific handler. But you could set a timeout and do that, just unsubscribe and resubscribe each time it triggers.
But wouldn't that be what debounce does?
But he's saying that the message is not coming across the bus. It's strictly a timing thing, right? Is that? Am I understanding right?
Okay, so I start my application. I say, with delay, log out or something like that, or what have you. So like after 10 minutes, log me out. But in the middle of that, I do stuff to it, So each time I do anything, I want to update that time and say, okay, from now, change that to with delay 5-10 minutes plus what it was before, and just keep doing that for every user event.
So debounce resets the timer.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. So when you publish a message on the bus, it effectively resets the timer as long as you haven't surpassed that time.
So in that case, you just be like, as long as there's like some activity message coming across, it's going to be delayed if you're using events.
That's a great solution. That's a nice, elegant, simple solution. Just find the bugs.
Yeah. Yeah, and that would be an ideal scenario for that. So this is just add the delay to all your handlers. So with priority, you can basically give a number to a callback and say that this callback should be executed before any others or after others. Higher priority callbacks are triggered first in the callback queue. So in this example, I have a topic called stock event, and I have two functions that are going to act as handlers. One is called stockholder, and the other is called insider. And I'm going to subscribe to this channel. The stockholder gets a priority of 100, and the insider gets a priority of 75. And actually, I know this is an older example because I have the numbers reversed. So it used to be in Postal that lower priority is fired first and the higher priority is fired last. So really, the insider should have the priority of 100, and the stockholder should have the priority of 75. So that when this event is put on the bus, the insider always knows the stock information before the actual stockholder. Because they want to know those things first, so they can cheat everyone out of their money. So this should be reversed. This was an older example. Sorry. Does that make sense? Everyone understand what's happening there? So with throttle, this prevents a subscription callback from being invoked more than once in a given time frame. So if you have an event that's being published on your service bus, in this case, I have a topic called DHS.track.movement. DHS means Department of Homeland Security. I had someone ask me what that meant. So DHS is interested in tracking your movements. Well, GPS happens, GPS data can come down pretty fast. So I have a set timeout function here that has 500 milliseconds as its loop, and it should have been set in a little bit, whatever. And this is going, each time this loops, it's basically going to publish something to the channel and say this is where they've moved to. This is where they moved to. So this is a very fast event being published on the bus. So up at the top of my subscription, I say with throttle 2000. So I only see this data come across every 2 seconds. So the bus effectively ignores any, for this handler, ignores anything published until that 2-second mark has been reached. Then it'll give me 1, and then it'll reset that timer. Does that make sense? It's a way to keep fast-moving data from overwhelming your application. So defer. This prevents a callback from executing until the current execution stack is cleared. Useful for long computations that could make the UI non-responsive. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this doesn't do things outside of the event loop. Maybe it's the other way around. He added this in order to accommodate that. Makes sense. That scenario. And so this example actually goes off the screen. But basically, up at the top, and I have a subscription that's going to do something with a large data set once it's been published. And what I want to happen basically is I want everything in the UI to keep responding until the current execution stack is done in JavaScript, and then I'm going to let the handler run and do its thing, do the computation after this event has been published. So this basically prevents the user from being blocked in what they need to do. So I showed my client application before. I showed the basic API for what you can do with Postal subscriptions. I do have a Node example here, and I'll just go over it real briefly. So my wife has this really cool thing called a garment. And if you're a runner or a sports person, you've probably seen one of these. It's kind of like a watch that's twice the size of a normal watch. and it does things like monitors your heart rate, monitors your pace, monitors your GPS, pretty much knows everything about you, like your blood type and social security number and a bunch of ridiculous stuff like that. It's actually kind of scary. So I thought, well, that's actually kind of a cool idea. Like, it's a realistic scenario that you might have some kind of node project that would be pulling in this kind of data in kind of a fast, asynchronous kind of way, and you might want to display it to a user. So I set up this node project with just some dummy data generator type things. So it's called FitBuddy because, you know, I really like corny names. But what I'm doing is I'm basically, this is simulating a runner, and I'm monitoring a couple of things. I have elevation changes, I have pace changes, and I have distance changes and hydration changes. And so you can see in this comment right here, the way I've structured this is that elevation directly affects pace, right? When you're going up a hill, you're going to go slower. When you're going down a hill, you're going to go faster. Pace directly affects distance. The faster you go, the farther you go. And distance affects your hydration. Pace should probably affect hydration, but for this example, distance affects hydration. The farther you go, the more dehydrated you're going to get. And so if I actually run this, we start seeing some data outputted to the screen right away. So the distance that we're running, this is just being output to the screen on a really regular interval. And every now and then, we're going to increment our speed. We're going to have some hydration problems after we've run so long, so we're going to rehydrate ourselves, this type of thing. But all of these events that are happening right here, instead of each of these modules knowing about each other, like I showed over here, so here's my dependencies: elevation, pace depends on elevation, distance depends on pace, hydration depends on distance. Instead of all these modules knowing about each other, they all just know about the message bus. That's all they're concerned about. And when changes happen inside each of these modules, the other modules react accordingly, and my output is generated to the screen. So in the FitBuddy example here, I set up a couple of, well, you know what, let me back up here. So let's take a look real quick at elevation. So elevation affects pace. So I have a change channel here, and here I'm actually using channel names and topics. So the channel name is FitBuddy, so all of my channels are going to be the FitBuddy channel, and then I have these different topics that I'm going to publish to it. So I have an elevation change topic. Current elevation is 465 feet, which is the elevation for St. Louis. And then I have a loop that's going to run, and the loop is going to do some logic where I get a random number, it's some kind of change, and then once I get that random number, I add it to my elevation or subtract it. You know, it could be a negative number. And then once that's done, I'm going to publish to this channel, and I'm going to publish an object that represents, it's going to tell me what the delta was, it's going to tell me what the current elevation was, and then I have a couple of methods on here that are just convenience Boolean methods. Was it an increase, was it a decrease, that type of thing. So, what depends on elevation? Nothing depends on elevation. Pace depends on elevation, sorry. So go over here to pace. Pace has its own channels that it sets up here at the top, but it also has a subscription on the elevation change channel. So if we open this up, we can see that our pace change is going to be the delta divided by 2. So I mean, it's just it's just your pace is going to change a little bit because the delta is only going to be plus or minus 5 at any given time. Was what I hard coded it to be. So this is how pace is impacted by the elevation change. So let's see, distance is impacted by pace. So pace has a couple of its own channels. Pace channel is just going to be one that is constantly fired. This is what you see on the screen where you see you've run 5 feet, you run 10 feet, you run 12 feet. So the pace channel constantly fires on a loop. But we also have an increase and decrease channel. So when our elevation changes, we need to indicate this to the outside world, right? We were slowing down, we're speeding up, that type of thing. So if we go back to distance, distance has a handle to the pace channel, and it's subscribing to all topics that begin with pace. So it's going to subscribe to the increase and decrease. So if we look down here at the subscription, we can see that the current pace is simply, this is the pace change channel, my bad. Distance change channel. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the distance. Hang on just a second. I need to be on the paste channel. So paste subscribes to distance, increase, and decrease. That's what it is. This is what happens when you collapse all your code and you can't find stuff.
So this is a stupid question, but this is on the back end right here, or is this on the front end?
No, so this is a node project, right? There's nothing actually subscribing to this. It just outputs to the console. But the idea is that basically, modules use the service bus to publish to events that each other subscribes to, and that's what you end up getting as your output.
You can use Postal on the front end or the back end.
Yeah. So there's a node module for it, and so Jim Cowart's also working on a Socket.io implementation, so you could actually do messages across the HTTP boundary and react on the server to messages published on the client and vice versa. Okay. So I won't go more into this, but you get the idea though. All of these modules communicate through the service bus, and they're all subscribing and publishing, and in some cases we throttle because there are things like elevation change happens constantly, so we need to throttle that. But it works out really well, and none of the modules are coupled to each other. So here's some additional resources. This is an article I wrote that basically is everything I just told you. And I'll give Michael all these slides. But so this is an article where I went through the API and wrote out descriptions of everything with code examples. So if you're interested in just having kind of a print version of this talk, that's where it is. Jim Cowart, who maintains the project, wrote a 3-part series called Client-Side Messaging in JavaScript, where he basically talks through the conclusions he came to while he was building the message bus. So it's really kind of a cool read. The third article is actually about things you should avoid in client-side messaging. So it's kind of a anti-patterns type of article. So I'd highly recommend those. This is the GitHub repository for Postal if you're interested in contributing or just want to browse the code. He has a lot of examples on JS Fiddle, which is really cool. So you can actually just log into JS Fiddle and play around with all the different features of Postal, run them all, see how they work. I use this quite a bit when I was doing research for my article. This is Jim Cowart's handle, if and else. So if you're interested in following him, I would recommend it. He does a lot of good tweeting, writes a lot of good stuff. And that's the end. And this is probably a real picture of Jim Cowart. So if you have any questions or you want to see some code that I didn't show, I'll be around after this, and I'd be happy to talk to anyone. So thank you.